So Chris is a friend. We've known each other for a while. Chris is the founder and operator of Canyon Creek Lodging Revenue Management, also known as Canyon Creek Revenue Management. And so, Chris, thank you for joining us today. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. I can't complain. I could find a lot of reasons to complain, Colin. I look at life these days as being on some sort of bell curve spectrum. And, COVID was such a big impact for you and for me and everyone. As we entered it, as we lived through it, as we are now exiting it, it's still a fabric or a piece of the fabric of what we do every day. We find reasons to either blame or support, that impact through our recent histories and budgeting and everything else. And for what we do, it was an inspiration, which we didn't see at first, but it ended up being sort of a game changer for us, and it forced us to just go back and reinvent ourselves a little bit. And, I don't use that as some sort of, hey, everybody go back and find a reason to embrace and find positives in COVID. It just ended up being one of those things where, we were either going to sink or swim with that. So right now I'm just really happy that we're where we are. And it's provided a great strength to us, and it's helped us to sort of embrace who we are. So right now, very good. That was a long answer to your question.
No, that's good. I was just, I don't know, 2 hours ago. I'm up at a client's office right now. That's
Sure.
why my background looks a little bit different. And I was talking to him, Scott, about it. I said, "Can you believe we lived through a global pandemic?"
Yeah. And they're still talking about it. Whether or not it was, did you take the vaccine? Did you not take the vaccine? I saw an interesting segment on that this morning. I mean, I think and we all know that the media will find a reason to promote anything that will drive some viewership, right? Or online or whatever. So it's still a hot topic, whether you're talking about an ex-president or a current president or whatever. It's in our daily fabric, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. And to our point of what we're going to be talking about today, being an entrepreneur at any age, much less, in our sunset years, right? So how does that impact? What are we looking for, and what should we expect?
I sure hope we're not in our sunset years just yet, Chris. So before we get into the meat of things, tell us a little bit about Canyon Creek Revenue Management. What do you do? What do you do there?
So we're in the lodging space. I've been in the hotel business since 1991. I kind of fell rear into it from a finance degree from North Texas. And at a time when the big houses were not hiring, analysts or financial graduates or accounting graduates. And so I took a part-time job, and before I knew it, I was 10 years with Embassy Suites, and that grew into other engagements, other management companies, as well as other brands and chains of, corporate level things that I was doing. And they all tended to be in that revenue management space, which, and for revenue management, for those that don't know, it's a little bit of rocket surgery, but it's mostly analytics and logistics and timing. You've got some time variables because things expire. Rooms you can't sell a room today that you had or yesterday for today. So we've got perishable inventories that we deal with, but we stole or borrowed it from the airline industry after deregulation, and it's taken over. It was sort of a dirty word there for a while in the late in the 90s through the 2000s, but today it's a very highly respected discipline, and the brands have embraced it, and they certainly force it or push it onto their owners and operators that are out there. But we're in a space where we can compete and provide an alternative against those initiatives, if you will, and give someone a better approach to their asset. Because a lot of what's going on in our space, and maybe this you see this in other industries, Colin, but the brands and chains tend to have their impression or their ideas of what they think is great for a given hotel. What they're really saying is what's really good for us and what's really good for the team. And as a selfish, SOB, for my client, I'm telling our clients, and I've always told them, it's not about them, it's about you and what that asset is. And as a piece of art on the wall, you want it to be worth more tomorrow than it is today. And if that means going against what a standard is, we're here to help you do that. So that's kind of our message. And it sort of blossomed in COVID. I was mentioning that a minute ago, and we talked on the first time we got together about a hashtag that we created called Pirate Revenue. And we just really embraced this sort of coloring outside the lines environment. And it really kind of took off, and it launched us into a lot of other podcasts and even support webinars during COVID for some of the member organizations that were out there leading training and just doing what we can to sort of support all these hotels just to keep the doors open and sell one more room. So it has paid off in dividends since that happened. So we still embrace it. And I'm not wearing an eye patch today, which I normally wear, but it's been a good mantra for us. And maybe I'll change the name of my company.
Yeah, well, that was a great mantra. And by the way, I realized when you started talking a minute ago, I didn't even have my microphone up to me, so there's no telling what the sound.
Oh no, I heard you fine. I'm thinking everybody heard you fine. I hope you hear me okay.
This is a professional podcast, and I don't want the sound to be off or anything. Quite
sure.
Frankly.
Sure. No.
So yeah, for those who don't know, when Chris has been on before, or when he does things in the past, and maybe even in the future, he had a patch on. And a lot of people were worried about Chris, and maybe something happened to his eye.
Poked his eye out. Steve Martin and Dirty Rotten Scoundrels to keep.
Yeah, but it was just part of the marketing scheme, and it's not scheme in a bad way, right? It was
right.
Pirate revenue. It was finding a way to survive. It was lying, cheating, stealing, not in a bad way, right? All those things sound bad, but
you know what? I don't have a problem using the word stealing and borrowing and everything else. I mean, we really were doing those things, and we were going to get some of the standards and getting our hands slapped. And at the end of the day, that's the worst thing that's going to happen, is to get your hands slapped. And if they fine you or you do something wrong or whatever, well, push the envelope, be the spoiled child or whatever you want to call it, and get the most for what you're doing. And I'll talk specifically about the hotel world, where as a franchisor you have engaged a big company. It could be Arby's, it could be anything, where you have decided to sell a product or a service or whatever, and they have a standard. They want you to walk and talk, like I said, the way they think you should be walking and talking. But your edge of the corner might be a little different than someone 6 states away, and what's important to you. I don't know if you saw the movie The Founder. Colin.
I did. I've seen it 3 times. I love that movie.
It's funny when it's on. I tend to watch it, like I just gravitate to it like Die Hard. People have these movies that they just, once it's on, they just stop there and they just keep. There's this moment in there where they talk about the freezer and how big this freezer is to hold all this ice cream, and they're talking to somebody in Minnesota, and it never even comes up in the movie, but who's buying ice cream in Minnesota in the winter? Why would you need that? And he even says, they need basements in some of these stores. So they don't think about that in Redondo Beach or wherever it is in California, right, because Minnesota is nothing like the edge of California, the beach, or wherever it is there. So those are things that, you got to make the most of it for your environment, for your investment, for your work of art. Right.
Yeah.
So that's what we try to push, and we just continue to look for those little edges and angles every day.
Yeah, that's great. I love that, because you and I are both entrepreneurs, and then we also support in our businesses and our daily lives other entrepreneurs and businesses. So you've got to take all those things into consideration. And so we're going to jump into sort of the topics here, if you will, right? And hopefully I've spelled everything correctly. A couple weeks ago on a podcast, I had these great clips and I put them out on LinkedIn, and I mean, they were so good. And I looked at the little header or the whatever that thing is, and I had the words were misspelled, and I was like, how did that happen? How does that happen? Come on, how can I let that happen? But I want to talk a little bit about being an entrepreneur as an aging professional. And I don't know what the right word to use is. I know you talked about sunset years. I know a lot of words are offensive to people these days, but quite frankly, I'm over 50. You're over 50. I'm not going to share your age, but I know you're over 50.
I don't care if you do. Yeah, go ahead. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I'm interrupting you, and I don't mean to do that, but I've got several friends who are much more adept at managing their work and life, through their lives and careers, and have already retired. I'm not at that level. I'd love to say I'm on a boat or a beach somewhere, and I'm not doing that, but maybe that will come, through this process. But I found, and two of them specifically, I find them bored. I find them, looking for something else to do. And frankly, they're in our generation, Colin, where, they could be easily still doing things. And I think our brains just need that sort of daily routine of activity. I start my day at 5 or 5:30, I should say 5:30 to 6 every day. And I'm literally in some pretty granular data that early in the morning, where it's forcing my brain to wake up and do things. Mm-hmm. And this is going to sound obscure, but I really believe that is healthy. I think that's just, instead of getting up and just going straight to the television and while I have some coffee and some other things, I have something to do between that time and even 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm not doing all that work, but I'm involved with those observations and even some of the decisions, because our clock is 24/7, that we don't shut the doors. It's a rolling night audit, kind of process. We never the hotels never shut the door, right? Where, right. Tom Thumb, there was a time when it was 24/7. Sorry, Tom Thumb is a local regional grocery store, but I forget when they started to shut the doors, but they used to be open all the time. But even they shut the doors at midnight or 11 p.m. or something like that. But ours is always open. You can always go into a hotel.
Right.
So there's always something going on, and there's always a process. There's always some need to be, involved in the property. So we have to, our day really never stops. We do things. I have teams that, while I'm not up at 3 o'clock in the morning, on their time zone, it is 3 o'clock in the morning for that hotel. And so I have people scattered across the country that do different things at different times to grab different data points. So, but I think it's important to keep your brain busy. Sorry to jump on that, but
No, that's great, because neither you nor I are medical doctors, I don't think.
Correct.
Or psychologists or ageologists or anything
Sure.
like that. But I think what I'm hearing you say, and I think what I would say, is being busy, particularly things that challenge your brain. You mentioned looking at the numbers early in the morning, right? The data early in the morning. I do a lot of stuff related to one of my businesses early in the morning, like 5 a.m. when I wake up, and it gets your brain going. It's almost like a crossword puzzle or one of those types of things that really gets your brain going. And I know you talked about the founder, right? He was a little bit older, I think, when some of that was going on.
Great example. Yeah.
Colonel Sanders, the Kentucky Fried Chicken, was older and had a lot of experience when he finally got the Kentucky Fried Chicken thing going. And those guys were entrepreneurs at one point, right?
Yeah.
Now, the way the world works now, there's so many solo entrepreneurs or solopreneurs, right? A lot of people are, there's this gig economy where people are working for themselves and doing things for themselves, which is essentially, in my mind, entrepreneurship. But, later in life, sometimes we've got unexpected challenges. Sometimes we're tireder, quite frankly, in some cases, right? Or we do things to keep us a little bit more active. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the challenges that come up. Some of the other stereotypes, if you will, that surround it's interesting because I think it depends on who you talk to. Some people may say, well, older people are just, they may not be around a long time, right? There's age discrimination in employment. I think some of that comes over, though I don't have a lot of data. I do think some of that comes over into hiring a fractional or an entrepreneur or a gig type worker too, because a stereotype may be, well, they're not going to be around for long, or they're going to jump ship and do something else. Younger people, there's stereotypes related to them too. But why did you go into business for yourself as opposed to, say, working for a company?
Mine was kind of forced. I'll go back to my routine, or my resume, my verbal sort of, how I got here kind of thing, the 10 years with Embassy Suites and multiple positions. And then this was Promise Hotels, which gets swallowed up by Hilton Hotels. And I had been offered this really cool job, this regional job that had been wanting for a long time. And as soon as Hilton came in, they rescinded that offer along with another 100 of them because of all these things that were going on. And a lot of my colleagues were leaving Promise Hilton, if you will, to go to La Quinta, which had just moved from San Antonio to Dallas. And I thought, as crazy as it sounds, and I was sort of being lured to go work with that crowd. I did, and followed them over there, but that was short-lived because they were in financial turmoil, and I skipped over to Wyndham Hotels. And then I did start for the first time, I started my own business called Foresight Technologies. And I had always wanted to take what I do and make it as a deliverable to owners and operators, as I'm doing today. The flaw in 2000, this is right after 9/11, by the way.
Okay.
The flaw in it was I didn't have access to the data. I had to rely on the hotels to send me things because there was internet, but nothing like there is today. There was no access to the systems that the hotels use. They use a property management system. They use a central reservation system. They use a distribute. All these things we have to have access to today that we pull things from, make adjustments to. Well, that stuff wasn't available to me in 2000, 2001. So it became on-site. If I got a customer, I had to go visit them and actually work on site for them. And that on-site turned into a physical engagement with Holiday Inn Corporation. So I sort of parked it again. I mean, it was great money. Obviously, they lured me to go do that. And I'm like, okay, I'll just park Foresight and maybe I'll crank it up again one day.
Sure.
But, through that, I worked through Holiday Inn for 3 or 4 years, and I worked for management companies, which are these are big. A franchisor typically doesn't have one hotel. They might have 30, 40, 50, or 100. It's right. Being consolidated today. And so I was working with some of those groups or whatever, learning more things from that side of the fence. And then 2008 came along, and there was a downsizing everywhere. And I got this, I would say this crazy idea to go open a hotel. I had been around these franchisors that were running a Hampton Inn, for example, and I'd given some advice to a friend of mine. And so we'll back up about 15 years. And so I'm not in this age. We're now, mid 30s or whatever, late 30s, 40s. And I'm talking, he's a Southwest Airlines pilot, and he wanted to open or take a hotel in Clemson where he went to college and convert it to something. And I'm giving him what I think are the good ideas. I hang up the phone and I tell Linda, my wife, and I was like, why am I telling Bert this? I mean, why don't I just go open a Hampton Inn somewhere? I mean, you could build a Hampton Inn in the middle. You could build a Hampton Inn in the middle of the desert, and it's going to make money. Maybe not so much today, but back in the day, you could not make a mistake with a Hampton Inn. And so this is in the middle of this banking implosion, and I get this bright idea to open a Hampton Inn, and it was in East Texas, and everything, all the due diligence I did was really good, but the whether I got the equity or the debt, which I didn't, I had a little bit of both. The process was amazing for me because it allowed me to look at all the hotel stuff that we do today. I look at sort of a debt service and a deal structure environment for the operator. Mm-hmm. Nobody else does that for what we do. Everybody else looks at it from this real geeky standpoint of, what rate can we get? It's really about what what strategy can you put against the hotel that makes that hotel successful against the deal structure that's out there?
Right.
And I'm sharing some secret sauce here or whatever, but it's important because those are little things that as an entrepreneur, I think it's important that everybody sort of get out of their box a little bit. I could have said, I've been chasing this revenue management stuff my whole career, but it was really this shock to my system that said, go out and do something that you don't know how to do, because I just felt like I wasn't burned out. It's just like, I need to go do something else. And that's not what I said to myself or to Linda at the time, but that was the truth. I needed to go stretch myself, and it's come back. I never would have thought in 2008, literally it was 2008 when we had this sort of epiphany, that was what I meant to do. But that ultimately was something that has really just changed me and changed my discipline and how I do things. So for anybody else, it could be that other little go out of your back door, go grab a motorcycle and go ride down and go to Montana. I don't know, whatever it is. But I did have some support inside the community with a guy named Scott Tarwater, the late Scott Tarwater, who's a good friend of mine, he was a great friend of mine, but I told him what I was going to do. He goes, that's just a great idea, Chris, go do it. And he was supportive through the whole thing. But those things are just critical in the process, because you have to look outside the box. So with that, that has sort of ingrained into our process. And it was critical for us to, or at least for me, to step outside the box a little bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, that's, and that could be more difficult for people who are a little bit older, right? It's interesting. 2008 is when I made a career change into a different industry. But when I started my entrepreneurship, essentially was forced as well. You mentioned that part of it was forced.
Sure.
I lost my job. It was
Yeah.
COVID. I lost my job. And my previous guest on the podcast, Matt Sloneker, I was actually talking to him, hopefully to get a job at his company where he was working. And he said, you know what I would do if I was you, Colin? He doesn't even remember saying this. He was like, you know what I would do if I was you, Colin? I would just start branding myself as an expert in our industry and just start putting a lot of content out and just kind of go your own route and try to find some clients. That was that's at least what I heard. I don't know if that's exactly what he said. And I started doing that. Eventually he did that as well. And that's, where I started my consulting business and had a couple of consulting clients. And, even over the last 2.5, 3 years now, lost a couple of clients. Got one where, things are going maybe not as great. Got others where things are going well. So, you kind of take the ebb and flow of that, and also started a business that's going pretty well with a partner. But like I say, sometimes things are just forced on you, right?
Right.
But you also mentioned you talked to a former mentor or friend, and he said, you know what, Chris, you need to do that. That sounds like a great plan. And and it's the same thing Matt Sloneker said to me was, this is what I would do. And sometimes you just have to listen to those around you, right? People that and I didn't know Matt very well at the time, but people that you maybe respect and know and trust, and then listen to what they're saying and go with it, right?
You don't realize that you get in these ruts. You take a lot of pride in your own discipline and what you've, accomplished, or how you've gotten somewhere after your college degree or not college degree, whatever, as you've grown and flourished. But, you do get into routines and habits. And, there was a time when I really thought, I had invented something, or, that my stuff didn't smell, so to speak. But you have to be taken down a notch a little bit. I certainly did. And for me, I think when I'm talking about the Scott Tarwater, incident, it was him still at one of his previous employers that had seen me gone. He knew me from day one in the industry, watched me succeed and be promoted, throughout the country and throughout these different chains and so forth. But at some point, the technology and a lot of things catch up to you, and your stuff, isn't so attractive anymore, or doesn't feel like it's as sexy as it once was. But, I think what he knew was that for me to add another layer to what I did, I think was what he was preaching, or certainly encouraging me for. Now, whether or not he saw that was going to come back and help me, he may have thought that I would have 5 hotels today, or have a small management company, ownership, whatever. That would have been great too. But at the end of the day, what it did was basically enhance me and what my message is to those out there and how we look at things. So there was no negative in what he was encouraging me to do. Now, did I lose some money in this deal? Sure. It's not free to go try to build a hotel. But you put your money where your mouth is, and you keep going, and you just look back on it as just a personal investment.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and nobody's saying things are risk free, right? So
that's absolutely true. So don't but be ready for it and just take those risks. I mean, everybody that we know is highly successful today, Bill Gates and Buffett and everybody else. I mean, they failed miserably in their early days. I mean, take anybody. I mean, Elon Musk might be the only example who didn't fail, but I think he's probably failed many times. But
he's probably failed before. He just doesn't talk. He just doesn't tweet about it. So let's move on. Let's move on to the next issue, or the next topic, if you will. And I'm going to use a different word than aging. I'm going to use older. So again, I'm trying to offend as many people as I can, I'm sure. But I want to talk a little bit about challenges facing older entrepreneurs.
Okay.
I've got some challenges that I've faced. You've got some challenges that you faced. You mentioned technology earlier, and I know that was more in the context of it at the time, whatever time period that was, 2002, 2003. Maybe the data, you didn't have the data, and the way to get the data was a little bit different. But quite frankly, let's talk a little bit about technology as a challenge for older entrepreneurs, because I think that can be a challenge, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and it's hard for someone in our age group. I mean, let's just be honest. I can hand my iPhone to my daughters, and in maybe a minute or two, they can do what may have taken me 2 days to do. Gotcha. And they are my technology gurus now. I used to be my technology guru for my dad, for my mom, or anybody else. But, I have no problem handing that type of stuff off to my children. And they're not, completely in the IT world, but that age group just seems to embrace, nothing scares them about a laptop, an iPad, Wi-Fi access or whatever. And it just sort of makes sense to them. And I think it's just because, honestly, Colin, I don't know how, because I'm such an IT kind of geek person. I think I should understand why they get it, but I don't. But I have to just sort of relax myself and say, you know what, just let go and just let them take off. Which means, in my circle, I try to surround myself with some youth and let them go with it. I've got one person in Chicago that is embracing some of our CRM focus and how we're marketing to people on LinkedIn and how we're gathering our 18,000 plus, or potential customers, our database, so to speak. In my mind, it's like, well, just send them all an email. Well, no, that's not the way to do this. I mean, you've got to find a more direct approach to get their attention and engage them. So that's where you've got to step off a little bit and let other people, trust other people and their expertise. So
yeah.
I'm not saying we can't do it. It's not something I profess to be great at. And if that's something that you're good at, great. If it's something that you can feel like you'd be proficient in, go ahead. But if you're not, don't be afraid to bring someone in, even including children or somebody in your family.
Including children. I saw there was a CEO of a company on LinkedIn, and I wish I knew his name right now. I can't remember it. Somebody that I'm following. And he said, I challenge anybody to post a technical issue that you're having right now, and I will have my 13-year-old son call you, and I bet it will be solved within 24 hours.
No doubt. No doubt. That doesn't shock me.
I'm not kidding. He said, I know some people may be offended by this and all that. He said, post it. I will be involved. I'm not just going to let you talk to my son, but my son will get it resolved within 24 hours. And
That's
I wish
awesome.
I would have gone back and looked to see kind of the results of that. That's great. I've got technical challenges as a solo entrepreneur or someone who was just running from home base during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I had to figure out YouTube, which is simple. I get it.
Sure.
I had to figure out how to podcast. I had to figure out how to connect to certain things. I had to figure out what platforms. So as you know, we talk about entrepreneurship, which can mean a number of things, but as a solo entrepreneur, in a lot of cases, you have to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
You have to figure it out. Your phone doesn't work. Guess what? You don't get to walk to the IT department and give it to them and say, hey, my phone's not working.
Mm-hmm.
I'm connecting to email, this, that, the other. You have to figure it out. And so it is a challenge. And now with AI, with artificial intelligence, and we're not going to talk a lot about that today, but a lot of people are scared and it's challenging. I've been using it for blogs and creating outlines for podcasts. And the other day I was lonely and just started asking it questions. No, just kidding on that. But you know, the technology is rapidly changing. And sometimes older people don't like rapid changes. But if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to be a solo entrepreneur, if you want to survive in this marketplace, you've got to adapt to technology changes and advances.
That's right.
Another thing that challenge that are faced by older entrepreneurs is health issues or caregiving issues. So, you know, right now, we've got a lot of people our age have our parents that we're caring for. We have our children that we're caring for. Some people have now their grandchildren that they're also caring for, quote unquote. But then there's also health issues. And not to go into a lot of details, I know there's been a couple of little health things that have come up, you know, in your life over the last, 6 months or so.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit about that, about not the issues, but about how as an entrepreneur you can handle if, let's say, you have to take a left turn because of a health issue, right?
Well, I think when people prepare for that entrepreneurial level, they may take a class or read some things or read a book or whatever. And there's going to be in there just some core basics of things that you need to be ready for that, like you said, on the IT area. There's no technology department down the hall. There's also no finance department or investment department or legal department. That's a big one, and so what are you going to do? You need a team around you. We've shifted our structure, our company, and we've done that over time. And you want to make sure your company organization fits, what your approach is, and how do you have employees or not? And those are things that you either know right off the top of your head, and if you don't know, it's okay. But to get those people around you, it's important. But for me, you mentioned, the health piece. I'd spent my entire life out away from doctors. And this past, since December, I've had some serious, health issues. Colin's got me on his podcast today. And here I am, I'm looking at myself on this little video screen, and I'm about 185 pounds right now. But last year I was probably around 250, 260. Or certainly through COVID, I was at least 250. And I made a decision to go through keto, and I came up with my own, and I loved what I was doing. I was making soup every day for lunch. And because I live, I work out of my house. And so that was cool. And I could make enough soup for a whole week. And I think that's important. But, I went from 250-ish down to 220. And then I had a health scare. It's taken the wind out of me a little bit, but it also reminded me that, okay, I can be really involved in my business, or I can be detached a little bit so that I have people that can continue running. If I had done everything, if I didn't have people around me doing the things that they do for me, my business would have folded up as soon as I had the beginning of this health issue. So I had customers that were very supportive. I had people around me that were doing things for me in my chair, and they were just picking up the pieces where they could and supporting. And it worked out overall very well. It wasn't perfect. We lost one or two hotels, I think, in this process, but one of them wasn't even due to, our ability to serve, so to speak. But it also grew our organization through this. So, I'm not saying everybody's going to have a health scare, but those are something that you just have to be ready for. It's like an insurance policy. I mean, what I'm trying to say here, and I don't know if I've said this clearly, is that how involved are you in the day-to-day? And if you are, take a look at that, because if you're going to run a business and have this organization under you, be ready for anything to happen. And that includes, you dying in a plane crash or something crazy. If you feel like you're serving the masses of the purpose or whatever, I want to be able to leave something for my family, right? And I want to be able to leave something behind to carry on. And will it carry on? Hard to say. But you've got to have those people involved that are leading in the charge, having the ability to have access to all the tools and pieces they need. And I'm talking about my world, but just anticipate those things, be ready for those things. But
yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that in the next segment too. But
okay,
that is great. Like, if you're a solopreneur or again, not a solo entrepreneur, a small business owner, a mid-sized business owner,
sure,
but you're still involved. You still are the brand in a lot of cases, right? You still
very much so. Yeah.
Right. Business. I know I had a client with, 60, I think 55, 60 employees, and the CEO founder was the brand. Right. And I think he's getting a little bit older and all that, but he's still operating. He is the brand. He is the business. And, what happens if something happens to him and, hopefully not. Right.
Sure.
But just, it's some of those things you have to think about. And, it's not just potential health issues, it's caregiving issues, right?
These are things, Colin, that I wasn't even considering. That's my foolishness.
I wasn't considering until I talked to you last week.
And now you got to write it down. You got to find some place in the lineup there to have it as those potentials. I mean, at our age, look, we're not scheduled to fall over at this age, but anything can happen. And in this day and age, I'll be honest, his name was Scott. I'll think of it in a minute. Anyway, he was a colleague of mine from Embassy Suites days from years ago, fit. And I was asking my friend Gina, how's Scott doing? She goes, he passed away about 3 months ago. I was like, what? She goes, yeah, he was out just mowing his lawn. He just fell and had a heart attack. And I'm like, that's not supposed to happen to us. And this, and my friend Matt Furry passed away, 4 or 5 years ago in Atlanta, my roommate from college. The guy, I think until he got pneumonia and sepsis and was running steps at the stadium. He's a former college athlete, North Texas goalie. I mean, just always knew him as super fit, and just, it can happen anywhere, but you don't think about that regardless of how you're treating your body. And it was a good wake up call for me, but it just seems like now that I'm more aware of it, I'm, it's been a big change in my life. So it'll be something I think about. Yeah.
That's a very strong one. Just thinking about the health and just having a plan. And we'll talk more about that. One of the bullets that I have here, one of the topics I have here to talk about in this segment, and then we'll move on to the next one, is one that I think is very real for people who are over the age of 50, maybe who are either going into business for themselves or even starting a company for themselves, is managing the fear of failure and societal expectations. If you're 24 and you start working somewhere and you lose your job, big deal, right? Well, the company made some cuts, or COVID happened and they were not going to have any more money, and everybody kind of sympathizes with you and helps you find another job, you network out. But if you started your own business, if you're 55 and you were brave enough to go out, or 50 or whatever age, and start your own business, and that business fails, how will society view you as a failure, right? As this guy started his own business and he couldn't even make it, right?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. That to me is very real, and people may not say it's real, but it's in the back of my mind as a entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. I think if you if you realize or really believe that it's the right thing to do, I'm not sure you worry about those perceptions. I can honestly say that I knew that it was a big risk to start Foresight. I had gone through what I thought was some good due diligence on it. I knew there was some opportunity there, and we did make money. It didn't end up being what I thought was going to happen. So the flexibility is important. But I mean, when you're first starting out and there's not a lot of income coming in, you know, things get pretty tight, right? So that's when you may worry about, how people perceive you. But, a lot of times, like you said, there's different events in this world that, cause us to not just be alone in those situations where you, just like you said, you were, the COVID or 9/11 or the 2008 banking implosion. Those types of things impact a lot of people. If we're not doing well during the good times and we're floating around, well, obviously that's a conversation you might want to have with a mentor. Maybe you're in the wrong field, or that's a different thing. But if you're going off and trying to start something that's legitimate, you just want to make sure you've got all the right resources around you. It's not like I thought this would be the right thing to do. The second time, I knew there was a need for it, but I realized the things are more in place in 2008, 2009. And I had a built-in customer, which really sort of launched it. I should have mentioned that. It's not like, I went out sourcing business. I had a customer or a former boss that reached out, and we started it with him, and that sort of took off. Now I was doing some other work for some other things in the meantime. And one of them is NTT data, where I was a subject matter expert, so to speak. So those are nice to have, those relationships where you can go and support with your brand and with your expertise while you still are supporting what is a small business at the time, which has now grown to a pretty legitimate size. But had this failed, it would have just failed, and I would have just had to accept the fact that it didn't take off, and I would have just continued down the road. You can't quit and you can't give up, Colin. You just have to keep going. That's just my principle.
Now you're a motivational speaker. And
Thank you. Tony Robbins.
So exactly. So we're going to go to the next segment here, the next topic, and kind of start winding things down here. We're going to discuss strategies for success and work-life balance. And it ties into what we were talking about a minute ago. Mm-hmm. Artificial intelligence tells me I should share practical tips and strategies for older entrepreneurs to thrive in business while maintaining a healthy work-life balance. But I want to take a couple of different angles with this. One of them is, yes, the healthy work-life balance. But what I mean by that is I've seen a lot of the solo entrepreneurs on LinkedIn and follow a lot of them now who have courses and content courses and are making, some of them, $1 million, $2 million a year, which is a lot of money, right? And they're solo entrepreneurs, right? Mm-hmm. Or at least that's what they say they're making. And I believe them because I think there's a way to do it, right? One of them says, and I wish I could remember his, I should have wrote the name down, but he says, I started with what I want my life, my daily routine, my daily life to be, which includes walking with my wife every day, which includes not working a 12-hour day, which includes all of these things, and then work back. So essentially working right to left to, okay, well, what do I need to do to create revenue to achieve this type of lifestyle, right?
Correct.
And I tend to agree with that. Like I'm entrenched right now with one of my businesses in daily operations, which is fine. But man, I'd love to get to a work-life balance where, every day I'm done with the work part by about 1, and then I'm going to fish or whatever the case may be. And that may be a little bit of an exaggeration. Let's talk about work-life balance, and then we'll talk a little bit about backup plans and stuff like that as it relates to health scares.
I tend to bring hobby into my life, but I have a vintage car, which it got wrecked a year ago, and it's been in the shop, and it's about to come back home, and so I got to put that back together. But that'll be exciting. But in the last 3 or 4 years, I've taken on some new learning things outside of work. I know how to use a wood lathe now, for example. I got in this inspiration to make gear shift knobs for these vintage cars. So I had to go join the North Dallas Wood Turning Club. And that's been rejuvenating, and it's good, like we say, to keep our brains busy. But I don't know that I had that sort of template where I worked backwards from something. But I will tell you that I turned down jobs that would have moved our family around, simply because I like Dallas, and I knew that at some point I'd be able to home base or be able to do what I do from one location. But I could have made a lot of money if I had just stayed in certain roles and certain paths. And I think I would have been miserable doing that. And I think whether or not we had that I either defined it then or that we define it at all, I think we know what that is. And if we choose that, we know that's a choice to live that 80-hour week. But and you're talking as if, everybody wants a work-life balance. That's not true. And you and I both know that.
Mm-hmm.
But for those that do want a balance, which I think is super important, certainly now more than ever, but I think you have to have a plan to get there. And what you've mentioned is a good plan. What are those distractions? Is it walking with your family? Is it having a pet? Is it living in a good residential area, a good safe area? I think those are important. I think it's good to have some, my mother owns a home on 2 acres in North Carolina with about 18 acres of farm and woodland behind it. I mean, it's one of my favorite places to go, vacation, which she's renting out right now, but I could live the rest of my life there. My grandfather did, for sure.
I bet.
And it was near the coast. And, a lot of my friends from high school are living in Beaufort, North Carolina, which is beautiful. And they've got their backyard is a lagoon with a bridge out to their boat, and I'm like, I would love to do that. Now I could do that. I could have done that. I haven't done that. And it means that, that would mean a lot of shifting. I have 2 daughters, one that's in college where she's working on her PhD at UT Southwestern, which is great. And the other one's a 9th grader at Pierce. And so, we like where she is now, and those are sacrifices, right? And to me, that's a piece of the work-life balance you're talking about. It's beyond me and what I do every day. I think I have been decent at balancing, my workload and my income around what I think is healthy for my family. So hopefully that's a little bit of expression.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I when I first started this a couple of years ago doing this, it was during COVID, and I didn't really emphasize that as much, right? I was like, I want to do all this stuff. I want to do all this stuff. But I think as I turned 50 and then now 51, it's really, I'm thinking more the right to left method is better. I need to, and this guy, Justin, that was his name, Justin Welsh, he recommended write it down on a piece of paper. What do you want your daily, what do you want your lifestyle to be? What do you want your daily lifestyle to be? Now figure out how you can, and essentially he's saying is don't just go get a job. Don't just go do work. Don't just go do these things. Kind of have a work life or a life goal not related to your career, and then make whatever you do for revenue fit into it, right? Whatever you do to pay the bills, right? And it may be that all you need is $50K per year. It may be that you need $500K per year, right? Whatever the case may be.
Sure.
But then you go out and achieve it. And what I've heard you talk about a couple of times, I think it's important to remember, and I haven't done as good a job of this either, is the mental well-being of it, keeping your mind sharp, joining a class related to, I believe it was woodworking, different things like that. And, I think now more than ever, not just solopreneurs, not just entrepreneurs, but there are a lot of people who are lonely, right? And part of the loneliness draws you away from mental well-being, right? Whatever that looks like. And so whether it's joining a book club or joining an online community or joining an in-person, a bowling league, we talked about cornhole leagues, people do golf and all of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
It not only keeps you physically fit in a lot of cases, but it keeps your mind fit, right? Which is very important. Otherwise, you get inundated in the work, you get inundated in your entrepreneurship, and you don't take time to take care of yourself, right?
You don't look back. You're so busy in the moment all the time that you realize 30 years have passed. And, it goes to those songs, and people write about it all the time, and just how, where did the time go? And it's just forcing yourself to take a step back and look at what's around you is I think just critical to mental health. Let's just leave it at that, because that's what you said. And that's pretty simple, Colin. And today, I think there's a lot that, and there's a lot of people that have not escaped that grind. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at it by any means. I certainly would love to go back and redo a few things, but it's important for me. I'm happy with some of the choices I've made, and it's not perfect by any means, like I said, but it's I'm blessed with a lot of things around me, and right now, probably more than ever, I'm really embracing some of that. I've been really thankful. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for being on this. I want to kind of wrap up a couple of things, because if you're listening to it, if you're watching us or listening to it, or if you're maybe catching this clip somewhere, again, a lot of what I'm focusing on now is people over the age of 50 and the different things, the different challenges that we face, not just entrepreneurs, people looking for a career, people dealing with families, and everybody has a unique journey, right? Everybody has their own journey. So particularly if you've always wanted to be an entrepreneur, hey, by the way, you don't have to quit your job to do it, or you may keep some other form of income while you're building your side hustle into a business, just like a younger person would. Pursue your entrepreneurial dreams despite the challenges. We've talked a lot about the challenges. We are in process, Chris and I both, of overcoming these challenges. We haven't overcome all of them yet, right?
True. Yeah.
We are overcoming these challenges now. And I would encourage you, if you want to do something, start it out as a side hustle. Go for it.
Mm-hmm.
Find your passion, right? Maybe it is woodworking. Maybe you're good at carpentry. Maybe you're good at something else. Maybe you've got a trade and you want to go into a business for yourself. Focus on setting some goals and looking at that. And Chris, you mentioned leaving something for your family, leaving some of these. So think about the legacy, whether it's financial, whether it's just good advice, the old fatherly advice or motherly advice, or whatever the case may be. Think about the legacy that you're leaving. So Chris, do you have anything to wrap it up here?
No, I was just going to draw. You were talking, and all I could think of was paying it forward, and having something that you can step off. To me, it's important to not be selfish and to think that everything around me is for me, and that's really hard for someone like me who's an only child, by the way. But to have two children, to have one child come in was important, because I can remember the day that I was told that was going to happen, and my life just changed that day. My priorities were different instantly, and to have two children really forces me to think outside of me. Now, I don't do that all the time because I am just naturally an only child, but I try to think that way, and I try to be at least aware. But I think for us as I don't know, I was going to say as a country, but I think the tendency today is to be very narcissistic and to be very introverted, and we see that through the media and see that through TikToks or whatever. It's all about self promotion, and while I will watch TikTok like anybody else, I want us to sort of gravitate back to what can we do to help each other? What can we do to help those down behind us or whatever? Because if we can't pass it on, then we're just not really going to, we're not really going to get anywhere. We're going to be close to the expiration, so to speak. So I hope we turn the corner as a society, as a global society. And I look for
Chris Baggett for president. Let's go. I like that. Carry the banner.
Right on.
It's okay for older people to be president now, as we see all the time these days.
Thanks for having me, Colin.
Yeah, thanks for joining, Chris. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you. Bye.